Hi, I'm Simon Sinek, and you're listening to IDEA NOSH.
Hi, I'm Summer Rayne, and this podcast is brought to you by my friends over at Conscious Box. Now, I think a lot of us love a little monthly surprise in the mail, and Conscious Box is one of those services which curates some of the healthiest products on the market today and delivers them right to your doorstep. Now, I partnered with them this month to create a limited edition sugar detox survival kit. So this is not something that's going to be a monthly thing. It's probably going to be a one-off or two-off or three-off. But many of you know that I launched a site a few months ago called sugardetox.me, which helps guide us on a journey away from the copious amounts of sugar that we are unknowingly consuming. And the more that you read about sugar's effects on your body and your mind, believe me, the more you'll feel empowered to make a switch. You could tell that this is a big beef of mine, can't you? But this stuff just hijacks your brain. And you know what? Even after 90 days of doing a sugar cleanse, it still gets you. But that's why health is a journey, as we all know. And, you know, I have to say, it's not something that we should be stressed out about. I'm not really stressed out about what I'm putting into my body, but it always helps to be informed, conscious, and aware of what we're consuming so that we could actually make healthier choices. And when we start to make healthier choices, it starts to become routinized and become a routine in our daily lives. So in this box, there's a lot of great stuff. I personally selected 10 awesome items to get you started. So I've been discovering so many great products through another great service that I work closely with called Good Eggs. Some of you have probably already heard about it. And if you're on the sugardetox.me newsletter, you would have gotten the opportunity to get some free veggies from Good Eggs. So this is a farm-to-fridge grocery delivery service, and some of the products that I included in the box that I found through Good Eggs as well is Mina harissa and Tierra Farm nuts and even some great California Coast olives. And we also have some great tea flavors from August Tea, which is a new company out in LA, and some delicious spices, and even Fed Up. I'm not sure if you have seen it, but this is an excellent documentary on the health effects of sugar, executive produced by Katie Couric herself. Anyway, there is so much great stuff in this box, and Conscious Box is offering it for $54.99 with free shipping, which is 30% discount off of retail. So if you went and bought all of these individual products at the store, you'd be paying much more. So it's already 30% off. And any podcast listeners here could also get an additional 10% off with the code SUMMER, which you could just use at checkout. That's my name and like the season, SUMMER. And the ordering ends on May 8th. So you could head over to consciousbox.com or Sugar Detox Me for more info. All right. That was my little pitch for good health and good food. Now, on to the podcast. This is IDEA NOSH, a podcast where we explore ideas that shape our world. Today, I am speaking with Simon Sinek, best-selling author and inspirer, which I found out is a real word and a weird word, but that is exactly what Simon Sinek is and what he does on a daily basis. Now, I never really want to assume you already know who a guest is because, quite frankly, when I first met Simon over 5 years ago now in a taxi cab line, I had no idea who he was. But whenever we hang out in public, I do realize how many people's lives he's touched because folks always come up to him and want to shake his hand. Simon is full of inspiration, and I am very, very pleased that we've gotten to know each other well. He really came onto many people's radar screens when he gave a TED Talk called Start With Why, which quickly jumped up to the second most watched TED Talk. But full disclosure, I think he shared with me that it got bumped to number 3. But whatever the case, it's got a ridiculous number of views. And it's resonated with so many people out there. So if you aren't familiar with his work, I just encourage you to watch it when you have some time. So if you haven't read his books, his first book, Start With Why, met with so much acclaim. And last year, he came out with his second best-selling book, Leaders Eat Last. So today, we talk about what his two books are about, his personal process and sacrifices that he's made along the way, and then we open it up to questions from the audience. There's a world of difference between insisting on someone's doing something and establishing an atmosphere in which that person can grow into wanting to do it. Fred Rogers, or as we know him, Mr. Rogers.
Nice. Yeah, I like that. I completely agree. It's the difference between management and leadership, right? It's the difference between doing something out of obligation versus doing something because you're inspired to do it.
And when you were on my last podcast on Conversations, you hadn't actually come out with your book yet.
Right.
And for those who might not know your work or are familiar with your work, with Start With Why or Leaders Eat Last, tell us a little bit about what Leaders Eat Last is about.
Well, everything I do is designed to inspire people to do what inspires them. Both my books and every talk I give, anything I do, teach, write, speak, whatever. And I have a very simple vision of the world, a world that I would like to live in, a world in which the vast majority of people wake up every single morning inspired to go to work, feel safe when they're there, and come home at the end of the day fulfilled by the work that they do. And so where Start With Why started that process, it's about finding a place that would inspire you and inspiring others to join you. Leaders Eat Last is really about the environment in which people thrive. We are social animals and we respond to the environments we're in. You can take a good person and put them in a bad environment and they do bad things. You can take a person that society has given up on, or they may have even performed bad acts. And if you put them in a good environment, they're capable of doing good things, turning their lives around, becoming remarkable members of society. In other words, we respond to the environments we're in. And so what I discovered and what I became fascinated with is these concepts of trust and cooperation. The problem with these concepts is they're feelings, they're not instructions. You can't tell someone to trust you. You can't instruct two people to cooperate. You can instruct two people to work together, but that's not the same. Cooperation is when they're willing to help each other, when one is willing to turn their back and trust that the other one is getting their work done without having to check. Those are feelings. Trust and cooperation are feelings, and they are born directly out of the environment we're in. So Leaders Eat Last is about how you create that environment. And if people feel safe in the place where they work, the natural human response, this is biology and anthropology, the natural human response is trust and cooperation. Whereas when people do not feel safe in the environment in which they work, when they fear their own leaders or they fear their own colleagues, the natural human biological response to those conditions is cynicism, paranoia, mistrust, and self-interest. And if you look at the highest performing organizations in the world, whether it's corporations or the Marine Corps, you find that they feel safe amongst their own. And so they work together, they trust each other. They're way more innovative because to innovate, you have to experiment, and experiment requires failure. And if you fear each other, or if you fear you're going to get laid off or in trouble, then you don't try. Whereas organizations that struggle to foster trust and cooperation, what you find is poor leadership. And that's what the book is about.
When we look at larger organizations or companies, I would imagine that, a smaller organization, it's easier for people to trust one another because it's smaller and there's more ability to work together. But how have you seen larger organizations, how have they created a place for people to trust?
So smaller organizations aren't inherently more trustworthy than big organizations. However, to your point, big organizations do struggle more. Because human beings are not made for scale, and so when you introduce scale to the environment, all the sort of natural human things start to break down, which is why structure and leadership matter even more. And this is the point of good leadership. And what I find so fascinating about leadership is that we don't teach people how to lead. It's a skill. That's all it is. Some have natural capacity for it because of how they grew up, and some have to work very hard at it, like any skill. Some people are naturally good singers, and some people have to work very hard to become good singers. And it's a learnable and practicable skill. It's what it is. And when we're junior in our jobs, our companies give us huge amounts of training how to do our job. Some people even go and get advanced degrees how to do that job, better. And if you're really good at your job, they will promote you to a position where you're now responsible to oversee other people who do the job you used to do. But they don't teach us how to do that. And this is why we get managers, because we can't help ourselves but to involve ourselves in the work of others, because we actually do know how to do it better than they do, because that's what got us the promotion. And so what's essential is that we go through this transition. We have to go through this transition where we're no longer responsible for the work. We're no longer responsible for the results. We now take on responsibility for the people who are responsible for the work. We must now be responsible for the people who are responsible for the results. But no one teaches us how to do that. But that's what leadership is. It's taking responsibility for the people who are responsible for the tasks, not taking responsibility for the tasks themselves. That's the job that they perform. And so what you find in the best-led organizations is that the leaders who work there are completely and entirely devoted to their own people. More than the customer, more than the client, more than the shareholder, which are all external constituents. They take responsible for the people whose names they know, whose faces they recognize, the people who are actually responsible for getting the work done, so that the organization may appease or take care of all those other constituents. And good leaders do that.
In your exploration of these businesses and organizations that have strong leaders, I'm curious as to the differences between what you've seen between women, leadership by women, and leadership by men, and what you think actually brings upon those differences and or similarities.
That's a good question. It's not that we need more female leaders per se, it's that we need more leaders who act like females.
Why do you say that?
Most leadership that is taught, there is male leadership. I mean, it's about decisiveness, it's about aggression, these are traditional male qualities. And yet what you find in truly good leaders are characteristics of empathy and patience and caring, which are traditionally female qualities. There's a reason that there's a family dynamic. There's mom and dad. It's not just dad, or it's not just mom. There's mom and dad, and it's not one or the other. It's actually both. You need both, and you tend to find a lack of, whether you want to call it female leadership or just good leadership. There's a lack of good leadership in a lot of American companies today, where things like decisiveness and aggression is considered more valuable than things like empathy, patience, etc. Again, it's not either or, it's both. And we need to get a better balance.
What does communication play in leadership? What role does it play?
Communication is essential because we're social animals. And so if we don't, just compare it to a relationship. Most relationships break down fundamentally because of a breakdown in communication. That's ultimately what the root will be. And when you talk about things like vulnerability, remember, I talk about things like safety, circles of safety, feeling safe amongst our own. The best definition of love I ever heard was giving someone the power to destroy you and trusting they won't use it, And so the ability to communicate fear or concern or gratitude, all of these things are extremely important because they make us human. And there's the vulnerability in that, as opposed to being right all the time or having all the answers. Communication is essential, both up and down the chain of command. It's essential for leaders to articulate the vision and expectations. It's essential for them to give positive feedback and constructive criticism. Likewise, it's essential for the rest of us to ask questions, to listen, to communicate to each other, to ask for help, be open when it's offered. I mean, it sounds so mundane. And I think that's the funny thing about good leadership. It is kind of mundane. They don't make movies about good leaders. They make movies about bad leaders because they're exciting. You have somebody yelling and barking commands and taking control, and everything goes terrible until they show up, and then everything goes right. those are usually badly led organizations where it's traditionally, a personality driven organization, even if they get good things out of people and people admire that person. Good leaders, you show up at their organizations and it tends to be boring. I mean, there's no movies about Marshall or Bradley, because you show up in their organizations and everybody's getting along and things are just getting done and people look out for each other, and it's mundane. If an organization was too exciting on a daily basis, I'd be a little worried. It's kind of like an equity. It's kind of like a company where their stock price is up and down and up and down and up, and it's so exciting. Whereas equities that are just slow and steady to rise, they're boring and they usually get criticized. I mean, one of my favorite comparisons is GE versus Costco. GE, and especially the company that Jack Welch built, are hailed as great companies. Really? They needed a $300 billion bailout after the 2008 crisis. Costco needed nothing, and that's retail, and you look at the two stocks, over the time since Costco went public in late 1984, and GE is literally a roller coaster, ups and downs, and they were loved by Wall Street and hailed, right? Whereas Costco was regularly criticized for being flat. Their stock price was flat, and they were criticized by Wall Street on a regular basis for prioritizing their customer and their employee over their shareholder, right? But if you were to pull back over the course of time, if you invested $1 in GE when Costco went public, Jack Welch had been in power about 3 or 4 years, to this current day, you would have made 600% on your money. $1 in the S&P at the same time, you would have made 600% on your money. $1 in Costco in the same year, you would have made 1,200% on your money, right? Now, you wouldn't have had the excitement of GE. It would have just been this slow, steady, unbelievably boring growth. And the point is, it was an incredibly well-led organization, incredibly well-led. And the irony is, way better for the shareholder. Double, 2x on General Electric, and way more stable too.
But the person who's buying the stocks is in it for the game, not necessarily for the long haul.
Well, you're raising a completely different conversation. That's a completely different subject, which is, is there such thing as a shareholder anymore? And are we actually investing? We invest in things like our children. We invest in things like the future. We invest in things like education, right? Like, why do you go to college? Nobody can actually demonstrate the ROI on that, but it's an investment. We have a perception of the value. These are the things we invest in. When you're looking for a short-term return, that's not an investment. That's a gamble. That's a bet. Like, I'm betting on black or red, and I'm hoping that it'll come up on the roulette table, right? And so the way we treat stock markets, we don't treat the stock market as investing. We treat it as betting, and that's the problem. There's a lack of patience. There's a lack of faith. There's a lack of, for lack of a better term, investment in that thing. And I have no problem with that model, but just call a spade a spade. It is gambling, not investing. And again, I don't have an issue with that even. The problem I have is that there's too many of those. We should have some things we invest in and some things we gamble on, but the way we treat the stock market these days is too many gambles, too many bets, and very, very few truly good investments.
So if you had a magic wand right now and you could go to Wall Street on how we invest or how we don't invest, would you change it? Would you change essentially the way that business gets gambled or invested
well,
in?
the change has to happen in the incentive models, right? Because the way that Wall Street analysts and brokers and things are incentivized is on short-term gains. So they're only going to promote things that benefit themselves. Of course, that's normal. And there aren't good incentives, nor does anybody want to implement any good incentives over, to do the right thing over the course of time. Even the way we reward senior executives and CEOs, no CEO is getting a reward after 5 or 10 years of performance. It's on it's an annualized basis, and so guess what they prioritize? Annualized basis. So it's not that I would want to, do it. Are there changes that are necessary on Wall Street? Oh my God, yes. The leadership is so substandard in general. It is so substandard, and trust and cooperation are like luxuries. They're barely existent. Nobody likes it. Nobody feels safe in their job. I mean, think about it. They would sooner sacrifice the people to save the numbers than sacrifice the numbers to save the people. How good does that make you feel going to work every day? And forget about the people who get laid off. Think about the people who don't lose their jobs. They just find out that they're targets for the next year. You know, these are some of the worst decisions, some of the worst environments that you can put a human being. I mean, and again, this is not a political criticism. This is biology and anthropology. I can explain biologically and anthropology why that is destructive to things like innovation, trust, cooperation, and just the general happiness and health of the human animal. And Wall Street, unfortunately, ranks really, really poorly in doing the right thing. But if I were to make any change that could actually easily be done with very little pushback and without threatening the status quo, is simply to create a system in which we could delineate those organizations that are quote-unquote investments versus those that are quote-unquote bets, and at least let the rest of us just know that what we're calling investing is gambling, and then have your fun. But I think we do ourselves a disservice by calling it investing when it's that's like saying I'm going to the casino to invest in my kid's college education. No.
Yeah, totally different.
Yeah.
Going back to your book, now that you're 2 books in, what was really different about the process of Start With Why compared to Leaders Eat Last?
Oh my God. Very, very different experiences. Start With Why was an idea that I had already been talking about and learning about for 3 years before I wrote the book. So I really was familiar with the content, and I'd been asked every question and really explored it a lot. And so by the time I had to write the book, that's largely all I had to do, was just write the book. It took me about 6 months, and it had its. I got plenty of issues. I'm short attention span and all the rest of it, but it was an exercise of putting an existing idea down on paper. Leaders Eat Last was a completely different experience. It was a theory I had based on my own personal experiences, wanting to understand where trust and cooperation had come from, and started to learn about it. And I was writing as I was learning. The worst part about it is every single chapter in Leaders Eat Last could be its own book. It's a Pandora's box. Every corner I turned, just the information flowed. Start With Why was about 68,000 words. And when I sat down to write Leaders Eat Last, I accidentally wrote 150,000 words, and I was just getting started. And it was impossible to organize. How do you make a linear, treatise on human behavior, which is messy and not linear? And so that's what I was trying to do. And I couldn't understand. I was interviewing all these social scientists, and I couldn't understand why none of them had written my book. Why had none of them simply overlaid the anthropology and the biology of human behavior, the basics, because it's not very deep. It's kind of like 101 on our society. I couldn't understand why no one had written it, because it seemed an obvious thing to write. And I understand why no one wrote it, because it was an absolute beast. And I actually got to the point where it was so difficult, and I was already 4 or 5 or 6 months late. My deadline had blown by. The stress was overwhelming, I remember. And I actually got to the point where I gave up. And I was sitting at my desk, and I couldn't organize it. I couldn't figure it out. I just couldn't do it. And so I gave up. And I remember, it's clear as day in my head. It was about 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night. And I just stood up from my desk. And I had somebody at my place who was helping me out. And I just said, I'm leaving. And they said, when are you going to be back? I said, I don't know. And I just went for a walk. And on my walk, I was literally planning my exit. In my head, I was like, all right, I'll give back the advance. I'll break my contract. I'll be humiliated. I'll get over it, And it was like rationalizing and convincing myself that there's 10,000 plus books published every year. No one will miss this one, And making myself feel better about not doing it, and was literally planning my exit. That's what I went for the walk for. And I called a friend of mine who used to be in the Air Force Special Forces, and the phone rang, and I didn't say hello or anything. He picked up the phone, and I just asked a question. I said, "What do you do when you can't do the mission?" And he told me a story. He told me a story about a mission they were supposed to go on in Afghanistan. He used to fly Pavlov helicopters. And from all the intelligence and all the planning, it was a suicide mission, and everyone knew it. And it wasn't one of those kill Hitler missions where everyone would die, but we would kill Hitler. This is one of those missions where everyone would die, and the mission would also fail. So, it was literally pointless suicide mission. and they were ordered to go do this mission. And he was preparing his helicopter, and his wingman was preparing his helicopter, and his wingman turns to him and says, "What do we do? Do we refuse to go?" And they all have wives and kids, you know. And my friend said to his friend, "No, we signed up for it. We go." And he said to me, "Is this book more or powerful than Start With Why?" I said, "It's more powerful. It's affecting me in bigger ways than the first one." He said, "Okay, let me tell you a story." He said, "Before I had met you," he said to me, "I was becoming disillusioned with the Air Force, and I read this book called Start With Why, and it completely re-inspired me. And I remain here now in love with this Air Force that I serve." And he says, "If you're telling me that this book is more powerful, we need this book." And then he said, "This is what you signed up for. You have no choice." And I turned around, I went back, and I sat down and finished the book. And the mission was obviously scrapped, and they obviously were, cooler heads prevailed, and they didn't have to go on it. But there was no sugarcoating it. You know, if you commit yourself to a cause bigger than yourself, and it gets hard, and it may even cost you more than you thought you were willing to pay, as he said, you know, that's what you signed up for, and you have no choice. And so I'm grateful he gave me that advice.
Did you feel a sense of relief after that conversation, or an adrenaline rush, or how did you feel?
That's a good question. I don't know. A sense of responsibility is the wrong word. That's too big a. It wasn't an external, I didn't feel forced. You know, I felt compelled. Inspired is too happy. I think I don't have any better feeling, which is his words sum up how I felt, which is, this is what I signed up for. I have no choice. And it wasn't resignation. It wasn't like obligation, because I could get out of it. You know, I had planned my exit. It wasn't obligation. It's like being a parent. It's like, it's hard to be a parent, but that's what you sign up for. And so you kind of don't have a choice. You know, you just got to do it.
You can't give the kid back.
You can't give the kid back. And leadership, by the way, is the exact same thing. Leadership is not something you do from 9 to 5. Leadership, like parenting, is a lifestyle. And that has nothing to do with rank. I know many people who sit at the highest levels of organizations who are not leaders. They have authority, and we do as they tell us because they have authority over us, but we wouldn't follow them. And I also know many people in the middle or the bottom of organizations that have no authority, and we would absolutely follow them because they've made a choice to look after the person to the left of them and a choice to look after the person to the right of them. And that's the point. Leadership is a choice, and it's a lifestyle. And if you choose to be a leader, which is different from having the ambition to work your way up the ranks, it's different. If you choose to be a leader, it's not something like it's hard work. And if you choose that lifestyle, that's it. You're in. You kind of don't have a choice to get out of it, you know? At least if you want to maintain all the perks and benefits that come along with it. I guess I felt that way. I felt like this was the lifestyle I opted for, and the cause I chose to, you know, that I wanted to use my life to champion. So
I'm curious, since you said that you had 150,000 words and you were just getting started with your book and you had to cull a lot of thoughts and anecdotes and information. And I'm curious as to what information that you would have loved to see in the book but you ran out of time or you didn't have enough research, things that you think would have added to the book substantially.
Well, that's a hard question to answer. I like to think that the things I took out, the things that ended on the cutting room floor, were the right things to take out. And though they were good stories, and though the research was compelling, it was either already the case was already made, or the amount of words that you would have to read to get to the point would have been too much. And so, and some of it was just too far down the rabbit hole. You know, some of it is unbelievably fascinating stuff, but it's just too far down the rabbit hole. And I'd have to write a couple of volumes. And that, by the way, was one of my original suggestions to the publishers. Can we just do volume 1 and volume 2.
What did they say?
They said no. They said, you can write one book. And I told them, but you can get a twofer. You get 2 books for the price of 1.
No more advances for you.
No. I didn't want more money. I wanted to make the argument. Here's a little secret that some people might appreciate. So it was such a hard book to organize. It was just so hard to organize. I took a huge risk, to the point, the risk was so big, at least in publishing terms, it sounds silly, but I actually had to call the publisher. He was on a business trip in London. I woke him up at 11 o'clock at night, to get his buy-in before I made this decision. I was going to completely reorganize my book, which is, instead of organizing it as one traditionally organizes a nonfiction book, I chose to organize it around a very tried and tested fiction organizing principle, which is Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. And almost, if you are familiar with Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, Leaders Eat Last is written to that outline. That is my outline. In fact, I tip my hat to it as well. It's not in the table of contents, but if you read through the book, there are these section breaks, and the first one is called The Force. I wrote a book based on Star Wars. That's
it's appropriate for those who know you. I think it's
but Star Wars
highly
is
appropriate.
Star Wars is based on the hero's journey by Joseph Campbell, and lots of other of those heroic tales, Harry Potter, and all of those guys. The Hobbit. They're all the same. They're all the same outline. So that's the outline I used, and it was actually really fun to write to it, because I was now had the opportunity to tell a story of which the protagonist is us, and we're the one on the journey.
You said earlier that leadership is something that you could develop or could be taught. It's a learned skill.
Absolutely.
What happens, or how would you explain when someone is in a special circumstance that allows them to step up to the plate and become a leader without having any prior experience in maybe leadership?
I don't think that trauma, for example, or scandal or world events create leaders. I think they provide opportunities for leadership to arrive. And there are those who, for whatever reason, will choose to take advantage of the situation and step up and be the leader we wish we had. Consider civil rights. Civil rights was a thing in the 50s and 60s, predominantly in the 60s. Now, we'd had civil rights issues for decades before. Decades. This wasn't a new thing. Racism in America wasn't new in 1957, It had been in existence for decades and decades, and yet where were the civil rights leaders? In other words, the circumstances were there. The opportunities were there, but where were the leaders? And so it took until the 1960s for that leader to show up. And you could say the same thing about a lot of world events these days, which is there's no shortage of issues, but there are a shortage of leaders. I remain optimistic that someone somewhere will step up. Takes courage, huge courage. But the issues themselves don't make the leaders, but they do provide opportunities for a leader to arrive. They open a door where maybe a door was not open in the past.
Being an entrepreneur that is so focused on kind of your own ideals, and it's inextricably linked, your ideals are so inextricably linked to who you are, you're basically putting yourself on the line. How have you been able to balance that? Because I know it could become so taxing on an individual. How have you been able to balance your life?
I couldn't do what I do without the love and support of the people around me. And that is what, frankly, put me on the path that I'm on. What started this whole journey, start with why that whole idea emerged. Oh my God, it's coming on 10 years. Holy cow. I started talking about it in 2006. Oh, I'm getting old. I thought I had to, the biggest lesson I learned in that transition that allowed for that idea to arrive, and it gave me the courage to even preach it. I learned that I do not have to know all the answers, and when I don't have to pretend that I do. That single lesson transformed my life. It made me willing to ask for help, and it made me willing to be open to it when I needed it, when others offered. I stopped pretending I knew all the answers, and it goes back to the discussion we had before about vulnerability. I allowed myself to be vulnerable. I allowed myself to publicly admit that I didn't know things, or I didn't know answers, you know? And like any skill, it's very, very hard at the beginning, and you fall off the bicycle and you get scraped up and you get hurt and you get punched around a little bit and you get beaten up and you get back up and you try again, and eventually it gets easier and easier and easier. And I'm at the point now where if I don't know an answer, I don't know. I'll stand on a stage and say I have no clue, you know? And the amazing thing is that when people see you as an honest broker, because nobody knows every answer, that's nonsense. You know, this is one of the problems with companies like ad agencies. You know, they like to tell that they can do everything and they can do everything well. Well, we all know that's not true. Like politicians, we don't trust politicians because they seem to know all the answers for everything. They never go, you know what? Dunno. You know, and there's something to be said for being an honest broker, that people trust you more even when you say you don't know. I gave a talk to a very large tech company, to a bunch of their senior folks, and the very, very, very first question that somebody asked me from the audience were, first question was, what are your qualifications? And my answer was, none. I have none. I have no advanced degrees in the subject, and I'm not an academic. This is no. I've not made a formal study of this. And everybody laughed like I was making a joke. But I don't have any qualifications, you know? And that's unusual. People like to tell you what their qualifications are. So yeah, that one to me was big, and I think that continues to protect me now. I do not believe that courage is this deep internal thing. I just don't believe it. I don't believe that you have to go deep inside to find the courage. I think that's not true. I think courage comes from the outside. That our courage comes from the knowledge that there's someone watching our backs. That gives you courage. And our courage comes from seeing those that we admire or those whose backs we have, seeing them do things. That inspires us to try also. I think that's where courage comes from. And when I look at my team and how they've got my back no matter what, it makes it quite easy to take big risks because I've got a bunch of great people around me. You know, I've had the joy of getting to meet some Navy SEALs and do a little work with them too. Great folks. And one thing that I learned from them is that they fear letting their friends down more than they fear death. The point is, once again, their courage isn't the absence of fear. They have fear, but the thought of letting their friends down or seeing, like they throw themselves, like someone would throw themselves on a grenade, not out of some intellectual courage. It's because the fear they have that something would happen to one of their colleagues because of that hand grenade was the reason they did it. One of their brothers is better than colleagues. Isn't that interesting, by the way?
Yeah.
In the military, they call each other brothers and sisters. There's not a business that I've ever met where people refer to each colleagues. Sure, like a family. We're like a family, but nobody actually refers to each other as brother and sister. And yet, in the military, people will hug each other, and they will cry. I've sat at dinner tables with generals, and we've told stories, and we've sat there and we've cried, and they talk about my brothers and my sisters. My kids. I know leaders who refer to those in their report as my kids. In business, it's my direct reports, right? Now, it's opposite. You would think that's what they would say in the military. You know, my kids, my men, my women, my people, you know?
I think that just goes to show that that's the biggest vulnerability that you could show is by bringing people into your family and opening yourself up to that, because the fact that person may not be there the next time.
Right. And it goes right back to what I was saying before about feeling safe in your own organization. Mm-hmm. If you fear that someone that that's supposed to be there for you won't be there, then you won't take the risk and you won't act with confidence. And you won't act with selflessness and humility, because the rules of the game would be advance yourself, otherwise you won't get the promotion, as opposed to advance each other and everybody gets promoted. There's a lot to be said for that. And unfortunately, and this is one of the major problems with good leadership, is it's hard to measure. I like to equate it to exercise. You know, good leadership is like exercise. You can go to the gym, you come home, you look in the mirror, and you will see nothing. And you go to the gym the next day, and you come home, and you look in the mirror, and you will see nothing. Worse, you're in pain. And so empirically, you're in pain, and you see no result. So empirically, you should give up. But you don't. The reason you continue is because you understand the philosophies and sciences behind it, and you know that it's not like that, and so you keep going. And on a day, I can't tell you when. I can't tell you if it's 3 weeks or 6 weeks or 7 weeks. I cannot tell you how long it'll take, but on some day, you will start to feel it get a little easier, and the pain goes away, and you start to feel yourself getting a little stronger, and you can lift heavier weight, and everything gets better, and you look in the mirror and you like the way you look. But I don't know when that happens. Leadership is exactly the same thing, which is it takes risk at the beginning. Sometimes there are short-term liabilities, like the results may go down at the beginning. Empirically, you might say this is not working, we give up, but for some reason you stick with it. And at some point you start to say, oh my goodness, this is getting easier. It feels better. I can see the results. I'm stronger. I'm better at stuff. We're better at stuff. It's the exact same thing. Everybody wants a checklist. The 7 things you can do to be a great leader. Okay, well, let me tell you the 7 things you can do to fall in love. Ask her out, give her flowers, pay for dinner, at some point tell her you love her, hold her hand. Now, if those things are all true, you're going to have to do all of those things at some point. But if you go do all those things, you won't fall in love. In other words, it's a human endeavor. It's a human enterprise. And as much as, people like me like to write books on the subject, and I write why books, not how books. I write why things work, not how to go do it. Yes, there's some framework in there, but there ain't no 7 steps, because I can't write 7 steps to falling in love either, or 7 steps to being a great parent, or 7 steps to being a good friend. Like, I can't do it. I can give you some of the frameworks, but you're going to have to fill in some of the holes yourself. And leadership is the same way. It's a human enterprise that cannot be measured on a daily basis. And the other problem is neither can bad leadership. Eat a Big Mac. What does it do to your body? Nothing. Eat another one. What does it do to your body? Nothing. Eat one every single day, you'll get diabetes. When? Can't tell you, but it will happen. At some point, your body will start eating itself. It's the same thing. Bad leaders can still have good results and feel good and give you energy. Big Macs give you energy, right? But at some point, you will break the organization. Well, good leadership, I can't show you that it's working every day. If you eat broccoli every day, I can't show you that it's doing anything. But at some point, you are healthier and stronger and better because of it. And this is the fundamental problem with the teaching and practice of good leadership in our modern day and age, which is there's an overwhelming lack of patience to do it right. And everybody wants to see the results in a month or a quarter or a year. And you may see some indications, but I don't know when it happens, and I can't tell you how long it takes. And people aren't patient enough to be good leaders. I mean, that's unfortunately, or it's not even the people, the organizations have structures that do not allow for the patience for people to practice good leadership. So we don't. It's not the people. I don't blame the people inside organizations. I blame the environments in which they're forced to work. And many of the environments in which we're asking people to work literally do not foster the capacity for good leadership.
Going back into your work, particularly even like when having to write the book, because I know that was an epic undertaking.
2 years.
2 years.
2 years.
What are some of the sacrifices that you had to make in your personal and professional life along the way?
Oh, are you kidding? I lost 2 relationships. I wasn't exercising in any normal, and the joke is I should have been exercising more because it helps you deal with those stresses, but I wasn't. And plus my writing style is not conducive to healthy living. Some writers, God bless them, they treat it like a job. They write from 9 to 5 every day, or they make little targets like today. Every day they write 700 words, good or bad. I don't have that. My writing style is days of guilt and self-loathing and no productivity, punctuated by hours of sheer inspiration. The problem is I don't know when those hours happen. And so I would not make plans with anybody for fear that when I was out, I'd be struck by something. And it happened. I'd go to a movie, I'd go out for a dinner, and I'd be struck by something. I'd be looking for pieces of paper to write things on. Sometimes I would leave if I could. So I chose very often not to go out just in case. But of course, when you're not struck by anything, then you just watch TV and feel guilty, and I should have gone. So you get the idea. So yeah, no, my experience, that book, like I said, cost me 2 relationships. So it took a hell of a personal toll.
And if you could visualize or draw, your network of friends, family, colleagues, professional life. What would that look like for you?
It's a blur. I like to, people talk about work-life balance, which I find a funny concept, as if it's two different worlds. It's your life. And the only difference between your professional life and your personal life is the desk you sit at. It's you. The reason your friends like you is because it's you. The reason your colleagues like you is because it's you. The reason your clients like you is because it's you. And if you're different at home than you are at work, then in one of those two places, you're lying. And everybody's obsessed with this concept of authenticity. Well, you don't get to pick one. So as a result, my life is very blurry. I work with friends, and I'm friends with people I work with. I have some of my closest friends were people that started as professional relationships because fundamentally I like them, and we share the same values, and we share the same vision, and we're both willing to take risks, and we actually use our work to help each other. I want to see them do well and advance their cause, and I want to help. And likewise, they want to see my message spread, and so they give me opportunities to help my message spread, and we work for each other. It's blurry.
When we went down to the Pentagon this past year, we went to see one of your really close friends get an award.
Yeah, I was promoted.
Yes, he was promoted, and he did a pyramid or a diagram to show people's names of who are the most influential in his life.
Yeah.
And I do remember your name being quite big.
Yeah.
Next to also his dog.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you seemed a bit shocked by that.
Yeah.
How did that make you feel?
So you're talking about Johnny Bravo.
I am talking about Johnny Bravo.
I remember I took you to the Pentagon we went to Johnny Bravo's promotion ceremony.
Yes.
When he made Colonel. Johnny Bravo is the call sign of now Colonel Mike Drowley, who is the person I wrote about in the opening of Leaders Eat Last. It's his story that opens the book. And I heard his story. Somebody had told me his story, and I got to meet him, and it was getting to know him, and through writing the book, interviewing him a lot, that actually I really learned to respect him beyond his accomplishments. How thoughtful he is as a leader. The thing that I love about all good leaders is none of them consider themselves experts. They all consider themselves students. And so they all have an insatiable hunger to learn more about what it takes to be a good leader, even when they're really, 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 really good. I was very shocked and humbled to see my name on JB's chart there, because I don't see myself as that in his life. I see myself as an admirer and a student of his. And the amount that I have learned from him of what it takes to lead is incalculable, a huge amount, both his words and his actions. And that he would see me the same way, I didn't expect it. I didn't see it coming. It's like sitting in a classroom as one of the students, and you learn at the end of the day that the teacher standing in the front considers you their teacher, and you're like, no, you're in the front, I'm sitting at the desk. And so it was shocking for me.
He came to your Barnes & Noble talk well for Leaders Eat Last.
He came to the book launch. Yeah.
The book launch, yeah.
Yeah.
You got a little choked up there.
Yeah. Well, I've told his story many times, but I've never told his story in front of him. And for me, there was it's like what I assume it's like watching your kid graduate, or in my case, I watched my sister get married. The pride and joy you have in seeing someone you love celebrated. It was such a joy to tell his story, and no one knew he was there. Nobody knows what he looks like, and to tell his story. Then at the end of the evening, when I was getting ready to say my goodbyes, to have him stand up and introduce everybody to him, to share this amazing human being with more people, to me was the best.
Who else has been the most influential people in your life?
There's a few. Laurie Robinson, who I actually wrote about in Start With Why. She was a colonel when I met her. She made general, I think by the time the book came out. She's now a 4-star general, and she is one of the most impressive leaders in our United States Air Force. She's remarkable, and a pioneer for women's leadership. I'll tell you that as well. Almost every job she's had, she was the first woman to ever hold that job, including the one she's in now. amongst other firsts, first non-pilot to have this job, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Ron Bruder, who I also wrote about in the first book, has been a constant support. Bob Chapman has become a dear friend and a mentor. Johnny Bravo, obviously, and there's a list. I mean, I could go through it, and it'd be boring for everybody to listen to, but those are the ones that people may know because I've written about them. Charlie Kim's another one.
When do you feel most alive?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm an introvert, so I actually am very bad in crowds. And people say, but how can you be an introvert? You speak on a stage. I'm like, no, but I speak to one person at a time, and it's easy for me because I'm by myself. I'm not good with crowds. So I come alive when I'm with one person or two people. I tend to be pretty quiet when I'm in big groups, even amongst my own friends. When we go for dinner with like 15 people, and I know I'm kind of the quiet one, or I'll turn and talk to one person next to me. So yeah, I come alive when I'm with one person who pushes me and inspires me. I tend to be a pusher. I push people because I believe in their capacity, and I have a bias for action, and so I really love it when people inspire and push me too. And when I have doubt, they go, just try. I like that. I always make the difference. I always like to make the distinction between somebody who's a supporter and someone who's an encourager. Like, many of my friends are supporters. They love me for who I am. They support me for the things I do, and it's all good. And then there are a few who are encouragers who go, have you done that yet? You got to do that. Come on, you got to do it. I know you want to do it. Do it. I want to see it. Do it. Come on, you got to do it. That's different. It's also supportive, but it's a step beyond. That's when I come alive.
We're going to go into the fun section.
Okay.
I opened these questions up to other folks who know your work or admire your work, and they wanted to ask you some questions, some personal, some professional.
Sure.
Also, we're going to do a little rapid fire section after that.
I'll try and be good about giving shorter answers.
I'm working on it. You don't need to edit yourself. It's not always all about the soundbite.
All right. I just know I can be long-winded.
So Paul from Boston asks, what delusions have you had to identify over the course of your life and let go of? And are there any that you are unraveling now or coming to terms with?
Oh, what a good question. So I think the one delusion that I've dealt with is the one I actually said before, which is I don't have to know all the answers, and when I don't, I don't have to pretend that I do. That was a delusion. And the belief that to be in power, to be a leader, that you have to know all the answers, or that your credibility is dependent upon your accomplishments or your education or your knowledge, is all completely false. Nothing could be further from the truth, empirically. So I'm human and I fall into bad habits sometimes, but I've exercised that demon. I think I'm good on that one. Current delusions that I'm currently grappling with. Such a good question. I think I can be a little quick to judge, positively and negatively. Sometimes I give people too much credit too quickly, and sometimes I give people too little credit too quickly. And I think the delusion, if we want to call it a delusion, is that, I think in general, and this is going to come out sounding wrong, people are smart. And not that I ever thought they weren't, but people are very smart, and they're when there's an engagement with someone, a social engagement or an interpersonal relationship, both people are evaluating the situation, and I'm getting over the fact that there's two, and as much as I want something to work and I'm trying to make it work, that so is the other person, that they're not passive in the exercise. And I'm really kind of grateful for that one. That coming over that delusion is making life more enjoyable, quite frankly. That was a convoluted answer.
No, but it's a good one. The next question is from Anatole from New Life University in the Netherlands. And he has some really perceptive questions as well. He writes, Why do many companies naturally gravitate towards the what and the how versus the why?
Oh yeah, it's because the what and the how are easier to see and easier to measure. It's really frustratingly simple. The reason is because they're tangible. What's are physical. You can count them, you can measure them, you can touch them sometimes. Like what's are stuff. Product, etc., etc. Hows are actions, so you can actually watch them being performed. But why is belief and purpose and values, and they're ethereal. And the only way you know they're there is when you look at all of someone's what's. If you look at all of their actions and all of the things that they've done and all of their accomplishments and all of their words, and then you say, I know what that person stands for. And so it takes more time and patience to get at it. You have to pay attention more. It's not as obvious. And it exists in the part of the brain that doesn't control language. So to make it even more complicated, not only is it hard to see, hard to measure, it's hard to talk about. So that's the main reason, which is we default to the thing we can see. We're very, very visual animals, human beings. And it's just easier.
Then why do we need the why?
Oh, because we're social. Because if we only responded to the environment in which we saw it, we wouldn't be higher order mammals, would we? We'd just be responding to, we'd be like any other mammal, just responding to the weather of the day. But we don't do that. We plan ahead. We have imagination. We have the ability to pass down learning in a way that other animals aren't. Other animals, yes, do pass down learning, but not like us. We have thousands of years worth of learning. My grandfather used to remind me, that thousands of years ago, they were just as smart as we are now. They just didn't have all the technology that we have and the benefit of all the knowledge that we've built upon. But they were just as smart, So that's why we need it, because we're not giraffes. We're not mammals that just respond. We think, we imagine, we plan, we work together. We hand things down. We hand knowledge down.
So this one's a little bit more of a tactical question, but Jeff from Vancouver asks, do you have ideas on how to encourage more leaders to lead on pressing global issues like climate change?
Leadership, so the growth of a leader is not an overnight experience. And so, for better or for worse, we can't just find someone, compel them, and then expect it to be done. Like riding a bicycle, like learning to sing. It starts small, and it starts ugly, and it grows. As a friend of mine likes to say, it takes a long time to become an overnight success. And so if someone is compelled to champion the cause of climate change, the odds are they were working on something smaller a long time ago, like recycling on their college campus. And then they graduated, and then it was something in their community and something with their neighbors. And then once they got better at that, and you work your way up to global, and that's important, because the way, some of these issues that we're grappling with are so overwhelmingly large. It's like conceive of the universe. It's like, I can't, it's too big, we can't conceive of things that are too big and too small. And so to find something that's tangible and easy to achieve, do that. Okay, now what's the next thing you could do that's a little bigger, that's easy to achieve? Do that. Okay, find a bunch of people who now, because they believe in you and they were willing to follow your cause and help you champion it and become leaders themselves, what's something else you can do? Okay, now collect a few more people. Now do something else that you could do as a group of 50. And eventually you find yourself with hundreds of thousands of people committed to the same cause, working in their small way, and you will change the world. But the idea of tackling these big global things, especially ones that are a little more abstract, or at least exist in the abstract, it's hard.
Samantha from Syracuse asks, in lieu of leadership in a company, how can one, a few, or a group of employees create a better culture or work environment for themselves?
So, in lieu of leadership, well, there should be leadership at all levels. So what she's saying is where the leaders should be and they're not. So here's the answer. And it comes from Alcoholics Anonymous. right? So for 80 plus years, 75 plus years, Alcoholics Anonymous has been helping people overcome the addiction to alcohol, the disease of alcoholism. And we all know, we joke about it. It's a 12-step program, right? And the first step is admitting you have a problem, okay, which Samantha has just done. But there's 11 other steps. And the Alcoholics Anonymous knows that if you master all 11 steps and not the 12th, you'll start drinking again, most likely. But if you master the 12th step, you will beat the disease. The 12th step is the commitment to help another alcoholic. It's service. And so we have to get over this very, very 21st century idea of me first and make it more, there's an entire section in the bookshop called self-help. There is no section in the bookshop called help others. And that, ironically, is the way we help ourselves best, by helping others. And it's not like, how can I find the job I love? It's how can I help someone else find the job that I love? How can I ensure that I'm happy at work? That's not the question. The question is, what can I do to make sure that the people that I work with, the people around me, are happy at work? And that choice, that commitment to see those around us try to succeed in the place that we ourselves are struggling, that is how you find the joy and the leadership that you need, because the choice to do that will inspire them to do the same for us. That's what happens. And that decision to do that is what makes you a leader.
And I'll add another question from Anatole. He says, it seems as if employees who may be lower in the hierarchy might have less ability to think abstractly. Is this true or not?
No, I mean, people are people. I mean, I know plenty of people who's senior who can't think abstractly. That's why they're obsessed with numbers, right? Because they can't see beyond them. So that's nonsense. People are people, and some are good and some are, bad, and some have one talent in one place and talent in another place. However, Anatole is touching on something that is true, and I think this is probably the root of the question, which is there's the general belief that the more senior you get in an organization, the more stress you have because you have more responsibility. And this is not true. A pioneering study done in the 1960s called the Whitehall studies, done out of the UK, and they've repeated them in various shapes and forms over the decades, and every single decade it's the exact same results. They discovered the more senior you get in the organization, the less stress you have, and the people who suffer the highest levels of stress are actually the lowest in the organization. And the reason is because as human beings, we struggle losing control. Like in a relationship, when you're feeling out of control, it's the worst, like we're good with good news, we're good with bad news, but no news is the worst because we feel out of control, right? Turbulence on a plane. It's easier if you're the pilot. And so at the lowest levels, it's not that people don't have the capacity for abstract thought. It's that they're very often not given control over their daily lives and choices how to do their jobs. They're told, these are the rules, you follow the rules, and if you don't follow the rules, you're going to get in trouble, you may even lose your job. And that culture is very destructive for an individual, for someone, where we restrict control over how to do the job we've asked them to do. And so the more control we give someone, the more capacity they will have for innovative and abstract thought, because we're letting them solve their own problems. We don't trust people to follow the rules. We trust people to know when to break the rules, because the rules are good for normal operation, but they're not good for everything. And that is incredibly empowering, fulfilling, inspiring, and most importantly, it's really rewarding intellectually for any individual who's given control to do their own job.
So what are some of the strategies that you encourage leaders, particularly in larger organizations, like let's just take an example, to regain or gain that trust in people who might be their employees?
So the reason we call someone a leader is not because they're at the top of an organization. The reason we call someone a leader is because they chose to go first, right? In other words, first into the unknown, first towards the danger, right? First towards a vision of a world that doesn't exist yet. That's why we call them leader, because they took the risk to go first, and it comes with very real danger, because you could get your head chopped off first, you could get in trouble, or you could lose your job. So the risks are real, which is why most people aren't leaders, why most people don't run towards the unknown, because the risks are real. And so some of the steps that we can take require us to do that, to take the risk to go first, which means it could go wrong. So I'll simply tell you a story of my friend Bob Chapman, of what he did, which I think exemplifies it best. He took over a company, he bought a company where trust was a zero. It's a large manufacturing, blue collar, American sort of manufacturing. And it was a fairly normal culture as we would judge most manufacturing organizations. They had, whistles that told everybody when to start work, and they had a whistle that told them when to have lunch, and a whistle when to go home, and people would clock in the mornings. It sounds fairly normal. But Bob realized that if you worked in management, nobody tells you when to start work, go to lunch, and stop work. You just start when you start and you stop when you stop. So why do we have whistles for people who work on factory floors? So Bob came in and got rid of all the whistles. He didn't make any announcements. He just got rid of the whistles. There were no clocks. All the checking in, gone. He took them away. If you work in the back office and you're going to be late for work, you pick up the phone, you call your kids, you tell them you're going to be late. If you work on the factory floor, you have to ask permission to go use the payphone. So Bob got rid of all the payphones and put office phones in that they could use whenever they wanted. If you want supplies if you work in back office, you get up from your desk, you go to the supply closet, you take out a pad, a pen, and some whiteout. If you work on the factory floor, you go to the cage where there's somebody assigned to work in the cage, and you ask permission to get the part you need, and someone else gets it for you and gives it to you. Bob got rid of all the cages, took all the locks down, and just left shelves and let people go get the supplies they needed themselves, right? And by the way, there was no theft, right? So what Bob did is he didn't ask people to act responsibly so that he could trust them. He simply extended them trust. And so one of the things we can do to create leaders, or to create these environments, if we choose to be the leaders we wish we had, is we have to take the risk to trust people. We have to take the risks to treat them like human beings. You look at a company like Lululemon, right? The average amount of theft that a retail store gets is about 10%, which is it's kind of high, but that's their average, and it's predominantly from employees, right? Lululemon is somewhere around 2%, and they don't check people's bags on the way out of the store. But what they do is treat them with respect. What they do is allow them to make decisions how to treat the customer. There's very few rules and policies at Lululemon on when someone brings something back, what to do. They simply trust that those working in the store will do the right thing, whatever that means, And that level of empowerment and giving people a sense of pride and joy. And Lulu is really good at talking about what they believe, and it's written on their packaging, and they treat their people that way, and they give to their communities. So it's not just, you can't just take all the clocks and cages out of the factory and expect everything will work. It's a little more holistic than that. And what ends up happening is the people who work there have such tremendous pride, they don't want to steal. Mm. But Lulu took the risk because it seems like you should probably check people's bags. Couldn't do any harm, right? Actually does a lot of harm. Because when people treat us like criminals, guess what we act like?
A criminal.
We act like criminals.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean we're going to steal, but that certainly might mean that we don't make any effort to stop the person who is stealing. Whatever, screw it. I don't care. It's their problem, not mine. Whereas if we're treated with respect, we'll actually intervene because we actually care. Because we feel that someone cares about us. We're just human beings. We respond to the environments we're in.
Well, we're moving into the last leg of this. Some rapid fire questions.
Okay. Which means rapid fire answers. Got it.
Yeah. 1 or 2 lines. Favorite color?
Blue.
Creativity is?
The ability to try something others are scared to try.
Your biggest fear is?
Letting those who believe in me down.
Biggest challenge that you faced in life was?
Getting over myself.
You feel vulnerable, or vulnerability is?
Giving someone the power to destroy you and trusting they won't use it.
Why you do what you do?
Because I am inspired by the people who inspire others. I am drawn to the people who are the givers. And I am compelled to be a part of that, to be a part of that world.
Words to live by.
If you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Henry Ford said that.
Thank you, Simon.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. How can people find you?
And all the usual places. We have a website called startwithwhy.com. WHY. Lots of free resources there, stuff to read, stuff to watch. Our Why University is there for anyone who wants to learn their own why. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the usual suspects.